go. There they go. Yep, okay. Okay, Mr. Marshall. By all accords, you're good to go.
Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting. Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of August 30th, 2023. My name is Doug Marshall, and as the chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I am calling this meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream at Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. This planning board meeting is being held in person in the town room at the Amherst Town Hall. However, this is a hybrid meeting. Members of the planning board and members of the public are also able to attend via Zoom. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and extended by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022 and extended again by the state legislature on July 16th, 2022, the planning board has been given authority to hold meetings via Zoom. The Zoom meeting link is available on the meeting agenda, posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting, or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda, which lists the Zoom link at the top of the page. Please be aware that the in-person meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual meeting, unless otherwise required by law. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so for reasons of economic hardship or despite best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the Town of Amherst website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, please answer affirmatively whether you are participating remotely or in person. We believe Bruce Coldham is absent this evening, so I'm not going to call on him. Fred Hartwell. Jesse Mager. I, Doug Marshall, am present. We believe Janet McGowan will be absent this evening as well. Johanna Newman.
Present in person.
And Karen Winter.
Present in person.
Thank you all. For those participating remotely, please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment. I will see your request, or Pam will see your request, and call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. Planning board members who are present in the town room should also raise their hands, their physical hands, when they wish to speak, and the microphone will be passed to you. Please try to use the microphone for all your comments. The general public comment item is reserved for public comment regarding items not on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during general public comment period. Public comment may also be heard at other times during the meeting if determined appropriate by the chair. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited, or raise your hand if you are present in the town room. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your phone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address, and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with the guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation may be disconnected from the meeting. Okay, so thanks everyone who took the time to come here in person this evening. The time now is 6:08. Just as an introduction, for the last 2 of these types of meetings that we've done in person, we tried to keep the meeting to about 2 hours in length. So based on the agenda that I'm seeing, assuming there's not extensive public comment, I'm hoping that the first or the second item on the agenda, the discussion with Paul, will go maybe half an hour to 45 minutes. And then planning for housing growth, maybe we have 45 minutes to an hour or so. And then the planning board elections and reorganization, maybe that can take less than half an hour, 20 minutes or 15 minutes or something. So that's my hope for the meeting. We will try not to cut people off if they have things they absolutely have to say tonight. But with that, why don't we go to public comment period, item 1 on the agenda. And so this is the time that I usually read who I can see on the participants list. So we'll test my glasses prescription. And I see Hilda Greenbaum, Ira Brick, Janet Keller, Jennifer Taub, Jenny Kalick, Branny Parker, and Susanna Musprat. I think I passed. So those are the folks who are attending remotely for the public. This is the time for any of you to, including the person who's here sitting in the room with us, if you have a comment you want to make. And this is, please raise your hand. So. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so we don't have any public comments this evening. Yes. Oh, it came, it went. Okay, Hilda. Pam, could you bring her over to the participants and we'll hear from Hilda. Please state your name and remind us of your address.
I'm waiting for the, am I on?
You are, Hilda.
Oh, okay, because I didn't get the little screen that usually comes up.
So you'll have about 3 minutes.
Well, I hope it'd be faster than that. No, I'm just hoping that we could hire somebody like Dodson and Flinker, number one, to bring the town together with an impartial party, and second, because he did such a good job with Northampton's new zoning and the whole public process that was involved. I watched part of it, and I wish we could hire somebody like them, in particular them, to help us bring our zoning bylaw into the 21st century, particularly with design guidelines, so that the new stuff fits in with the old a lot better than we've been doing the last 3 years. So I just hope that we've been talking about design guidelines. I sure would like to see it happen already.
Okay, thank you, Hilda. Are there any other members of the public who would like to raise their hand and speak at this time? Okay, so we'll move on to the second item on the agenda. The now time is 6:11. Discussion with Town Manager Paul Bockelman. Paul, we've invited you here to outline the town's processes of communication, sharing ideas, planning, and engagement with UMass, specifically to regarding identifying, understanding, and addressing issues regarding student housing. So this is an opportunity for discussion with the planning board about that whole topic. And because of my employment at UMass in planning UMass's facilities, I'm going to recuse myself from this conversation. I will step away from the mic and the table, hand it over to our clerk, Johanna. She will moderate, and then I'll stay in the room, but I'll come back when you guys are done.
Great. Thanks, Doug. So, Paul, I think initially it'd be great for you to just make a presentation of existing processes, and then we'll open it up to the board and we'll try to keep this to 30 to 45 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining that, for letting me be here. Also, Dave Zomack, the assistant town manager, is here. He's integral to all of our conversations with the university. So if the first question is what kinds of communications do we have with the university on a regular basis, I can sort of outline those. So every week, Dave and I meet with 2 representatives from the university. Every Monday, we go through all the issues, any issues that have come up, and any issues that we anticipate coming up, and it can be wide-ranging in those types of things. In addition, every Monday, we have what is called an on-call meeting, where public safety officials come together and they review the incidents and any call volume from the weekend, and also what what is anticipated coming up during the coming week. These only happen during the school academic year, so it includes the fire department, police department, UMass Police Department, university relations, different people from the university, and they meet they do meet every Monday. And Dave, you should jump in anytime on this. So those are the two things that happen every week that we have. There's also the campus it's called CCC, the Campus and Community Coalition to Reduce High Risk Drinking. That's a pretty large group that has lots of folks from the town, from social service agencies, from the university, from the neighborhood. And it was set up many years ago to have a conversation about drinking and how its impact on the young people. It's really about health, making sure that young people are staying healthy. And there's a real focus on that. And but that's something that is co-chaired by, I think right now, our assistant fire chief and somebody from the university. So, and then what I'm really proud about and that Dave worked really hard on is our strategic partnership agreement with the university, which we signed fairly recently. And one of the things we really want to accomplish with that is to cement in fixed communication protocols. We've had really good communication with the university over time, but we haven't, I wanted to make sure, especially as the transition in leadership at the university, that we had agreed upon times when we would have meetings. So what we achieved with this is that there will be, every semester, there will be a meeting between the chancellor and members of his staff, the town manager, the town council president, the town council vice president, and other staff that we feel are important. And that's an important meeting to talk at a high level with directly with the chancellor about the issues that we see coming up, issues happening in the town, and they've pledged to do that once every semester. In addition, we've also have annual staff meetings. We've secured 3 annual staff meetings between university staff and the town of Amherst staff. One of them is on economic development. One of them was on planning, housing, and growth. And one of them is about public infrastructure, which means water, sewer items, roads, things like that. And this is an opportunity for both of the staffs to come together to share short-term, long-term plans that are in the offing, and to talk about what we're seeing is what we see happening in town and what they see happening on campus. So these are the structural elements that we have in place. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that we do. We talk constantly with members of the university. DPW will be over there talking to them about water or sewer infrastructure, things like that. But there'll be other people, other opportunities to speak if they have an issue. They want to put in a crosswalk or a sidewalk, and they want to talk to us about it. So those kinds of day-to-day conversations happen all the time, and so those are the sort of key components on the communication part.
I'd like to interrupt quickly and just note that at 6:17, Planning Board member Bruce Coldham joined the meeting. Thank you.
Hi,
Please
Bruce.
continue.
How are you? Good. Well, you're early then on your clock then. So in terms of the communication, I'm going to just pause there. Dave, do you want to add anything to that? You okay? Anybody want to talk about the communication piece? Because that was one of the big topics that we wanted to talk about. I'll just pause there.
Thanks. Yeah, so the communications, thank you so much for summarizing that. And I see that you are in constant communications, but we also know how broad your responsibilities are. And so we want to take this opportunity. One of the reasons we called you is that we think that we could maybe help facilitate specifically this housing crisis communications by having far more regular. You mentioned the strategic partnership. Somehow you have annual staff meetings, and I'm kind of imagining a regular communication with those people that are at the university that are specifically dealing with housing on a regular basis, which is at least, I would say, once a month, so that we can sort of communicate and brainstorm going ahead.
So the relationship between the town and the university is a fundamental one for both institutions, where neither of us is going away. So we have to maintain that good relationship. And that's why it's a weekly meeting. And it's why Dave and I prioritize this as a high priority relationship. And we talk about lots of different things. And, the town, through, the university is always willing to send their representatives here. They sent representatives to the Housing Trust and had a pretty productive meeting with them to explain what they were doing on campus. So I guess I would be interested to know what are the issues that you'd like us to bring. It's really, I think for both of our institutions, for both the town and the university, it's really important to have sort of a single point of contact that know that we're talking to each other, who's saying what to each other. So totally open to have these meetings like this, always welcoming to that. Dave, as oversees the planning department, is in close touch with Chris and with Nate. So in terms of like planning, or I guess, what kinds of questions are we talking about?
I think that our constituents are constantly talking to us about this crisis in town, which you're aware of. The fact that the university, with its great housing need, is kind of dominant, and all other issues like having young staff people, young other people afford to be able to live in town, that's gotten kind of crowded out investors. We don't, I don't have to reiterate this because we all know that we're talking about. I realize that you're meeting, but the planning board is not somehow, I feel that the planning board is responsible also to the constituents for planning, for looking ahead, and not just through our very capable town manager and Mr. Zomack, but that we ourselves are also willing to be responsible to our constituents, to know what's going on. And we don't meet with you that regularly. We don't hear what's going on. And there, I think that you have a source of help and power in inviting the planning board, or having the planning board also get involved in this communication. There are things that the town, through the constituents, would like to be more informed in and to be more proactive in. So I would like to, and I think I've given this memo out, I would like to propose that a subset of the planning board, maybe two of us, I don't know, I understand completely what you're saying, that we have to talk with one voice, that we can't say something differently than you. That how do you see a possibility? How would you see the planning board as being more involved and being helpful in this case? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I think the way the planning board has a role to play. You're appointed by the council, and the planning board's role is defined by state law, really. And so I think that's representing those interests, reviewing plans, but also doing long range planning. You're the planning agency, the policy making planning agency. It's not the negotiating team for the town, and if you individually want to advocate, that's up to you. Every individual has that opportunity to do that with representatives from the university. But in terms of speaking for the planning board, or speaking for the town, I don't think that's the role of the planning board. I think, hearing you guys are doing an important study right now about what the housing needs of the town are. And, I work from the plans the town has established, like the master plan, the housing production plan, all those plans. And that's sort of how we organize our policy making in terms of communication with the university. I reckon, and one of the things I want to read to you is that, one of the things we put into the strategic partnership agreement that we wanted the university to agree to, which they did, says the town still faces significant housing challenges, driven in part by high undergraduate student housing demand, existing zoning bylaws, and new demographic trends. The town faces a housing crisis that is similar to other college towns and small cities throughout the country. Therefore, the university and the town commit to ongoing communication regarding their respective futures and how that may impact housing, zoning, parking, and transportation. That just means that we both agree, we know this is a big issue, that we need to have these conversations. And so I think, we want those conversations are happening on a regular basis. In terms of what the planning board's role could be, I think, if the idea is to create, I think there's two paths. There is a lack of housing in the town of Amherst and so one thing is to continue to encourage the university to generate more housing on land that they own. So that's one path. Another is to generate more housing in the land the town that's not owned by the university. And that's a zoning decision. You guys will be talking about that. And the master plans talks about what that should look like. It talks about concentrating development into our village centers, East Amherst, Pomeroy, wherever it is that we want to see housing developed, because we said we want to develop housing in our village centers. And to get the university to start, they built, they just opened up a new housing unit with 600 beds in it, something like that. It took them, I think, Chris, you said 10 years to get there. Getting them to do more things, put more things in the pipeline. It's going to take time for them to do it, but pushing them to use some more of their land to either release the land for private development or for them to develop it. I think those are both important strategies for us to keep pushing on.
Thanks. Just wanted to follow up on some of those points you raised. Last spring, before I was involved in the planning board, I did have some sort of casual communication with some friends of mine who are in the UMass planning side about some of these issues. And the main response I got, the tenor was, well, we're building 800 beds, so we don't think it's an issue. And so I'm wondering, in your communications, is UMass owning part of the problem? Because even the language you just read was putting it on the town. You're saying the town has a crisis. UMass doesn't have a crisis. So I'm just curious if that's the tenor when you speak with them, and is there a way we can be more, bring that to the front more? Say, no, you need to partner in this, not just tell us we have a problem.
No, I think that's a really good point, because I do think that the university feels that they've done a fair amount of production, housing production. I think a couple thousand units since in the last decade is what I understand with Commonwealth College and with the two new the public-private partnerships on Mass Ave. And I think from the town side, we've done 1,500 units, would you say, in the last decade? Beds, we'll say beds. I don't think the university, well, I think you should ask the university, and I would invite them in and have them talk with you. So if you want to hear directly from what they have to say, I would encourage that. They're more than willing to come and visit with you. And I think that would be a really good thing for you, the planning board, to do, because I think they need to hear it from more than one voice. And I think it's good for you to do that.
And I'm going to recognize Karin, and then next on the speaking order is Bruce.
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much, but when you say invite the university in, they need to talk to us. Why would it be a one-time thing? Why couldn't we have this be a building up kind of communication? We wouldn't necessarily be negotiating, but I certainly think that it's important that we're regularly regularly involved in this communication. So if you want to call it that, invite them in. Can we invite them in on a regular basis? Could we invite them in once a month so that we really have this strong communication?
Again, I think it's about the roles in terms of a policymaking group, and like the planning board. I think you should be receiving information that help you in terms of the ongoing regular communication that happens. It's a process we go through on a weekly basis. And so, and I welcome any kind of comments you want to forward to me as well. And through the planning director, we can continue to work on those things with the university. I guess what I would say is how you envision those, and I don't want to dominate this conversation with one-on-one, but maybe we can talk about this afterwards. And I would be happy to do that, because how do you envision those conversations going? Because I think that we would want to chart out a strategy for how we have that conversation. And I think we have an opportunity with the new chancellor to start to have those conversations. And he has been shown to be very willing to reach out to the community. I mean, he's he's been in town a whole lot lately. He's aware. He's lived in other college communities. He knows what the issues that happen. He's seen some solutions in other college communities that he can help. That he can visualize. So I think there's an opportunity at the chancellor level to re-envision things. But I think I think we just want to be strategic about how we approach it and where our pressure points are with the university.
Great. Bruce.
Thanks, Johan. Paul, I didn't know whether you know that I've been trolling towns like Amherst, small towns with large institutions that are, overscaling of the town. I've picked about a dozen or 15, and there's probably another 10 or so that I managed to talk to about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half, because the planning director in Burlington has said she's too busy, but she's given me a lot of data. And I've had Bob Mitchell, a former planning director here, who's from Burlington, interceding on my behalf and still not able to get a conversation. So talking to these folks is really tough, and I've been pushing on this for 4 or 5, 6 months now. I'm making progress, but it's very slow. But I gradually put these data on this table, and what I'm realizing gradually, particularly on the conversation at the moment, is that UMass is about average, it seems, in terms of the percentage of on-campus housing to the student population of others. It's slightly under half. Some are more under half. Some are a little over half. Charlottesville is building a lot, and they will be shortly over. I think Vermont's about 70%, University of Vermont in Burlington. So there's some standouts like that. But by and large, I think will be difficult for us to shame the university into providing more on-campus housing on the basis that they don't provide enough, because I think the data shows that they can defend themselves from that. So I don't think we'll make good progress in that direction. But I think having conversations to get more of these data, and this is something that I produced out of my head because I was thinking about it, and then Karen, no, it's okay. We'll stick it up. Oh, yeah. I was going to, this is for later. This is for the second part of the meeting, I think. But I've got one too few hands. Oh, this is that. So this is what I would like to know. We would like to know the student population. Ideally, we'd also like to know how it's broken between grads and undergraduates. I think we'd like to know how many are housed on campus. And again, breaking out that way would be interesting. That should then leave the number of students that are housed off campus. We can then break that down between students that are housed in surrounding towns. That's a very difficult number to get, I imagine. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be good to know. Then we have students that are housed in Amherst, and then we can think about what proportion of those are housed in existing multifamily housing, and then the remainder, which was really the aggravating data point of the last 6 months for us. What are the student numbers that are in converted single-family housing around town? And it would be nice to know maybe what it was 10 years ago, and more particularly what it's projected to be 5 or 10 into the future. And if you break all these up into grad and undergraduates, there's a lot of data points there, some of which will be very difficult or impossible to fill in, but others are probably gettable. And I would like to fill that chart out. And I think having some well-connected person at the university would probably help us do that. And I think I agree with you, Paul, that we represent another pressure point or representation of strong interest in town. We can do that. I think we're ready to do that. I certainly am. This is something that we've been heading towards now for 6 months, and we committed after we voted not to recommend the councillors Haneke and DeAngelis, we also committed to dignify the effort that they put into their proposal that we didn't want to support, that we should do something that we think is more appropriate, given the goals of their goals, is something we really support.
Okay. I think that's excellent, Bruce. I mean, we can get a lot of that information. I think most of that information, would you say? Nate? And we would cite the source from the university, but that's really good. I think one of the important things for us to talk about is why do we, this is going to sound, sassy, but like, why do we care? What are we trying to fix? Do we don't like students living off campus? Is it the increase in the housing prices that's happening? Is it the intrusion in our neighborhoods where we're seeing conversion of single family homes? What is the issue that we want to address by this? And I think that we should, in our own minds as a town, be saying, why are we caring about this? We cannot take a posture, and I won't take a posture of being anti-student. There's an important part of our community, and I know people like to stigmatize students, call their housing in certain terms and things, and it's just not appropriate because they're valuable members of our community and they give a lifeblood to our community. But I think we should really know, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Is it quality of life issues in our neighborhoods, or is it impact on our housing, that the dwindling middle, that affordable homes are being bought up by developers to rent out? What is the issue that we really want to address and prioritize it?
Let's do Jesse and then Karin.
So I'm somewhat new to the conversation, but I think you just said the two things, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I think we do know. I don't know. And we're gonna figure out how we can address those, right?
No, that's why I want to hear from the planning board. Are those your things too? Right.
Certainly from my perspective, and again, more seasoned than me, but definitely that's why I got involved.
Yep.
In planning board.
Yep.
So, the purpose of meeting, first of all, it would be really nice to hear from you. Who is the person at the university or the people that are responsible for housing and have the power, or who is responsible for what housing gets built? How does that work? And how can we communicate with those people? Is it who is it? And of course, it's the furthest thing from my mind would be to try to shame them or anything like that. We're trying to find mutual solutions because we both benefit. The university is going to shine much further if it's in a vibrant, healthy community and a town. The students are going to want to come here. Certainly faculty, if they're trying to attract good faculty, which is every university's desire, they need to have it be surrounded with a town that's vibrant and doing well, not one that's going to be dominated with houses that are kind of student houses where we know, even though we like students, flower beds get trampled, the grass is gone. There's no longer the same thing as when you have a vibrant community with lots of people that live there and children that fill the schools. So attracting faculty, attracting students. We want the town to thrive and we want the university to thrive. And that's how we would want to work together. But could you maybe fill us in on who at the university is responsible for these decisions?
So if you want to look at the most recent example, Fieldstone, ultimately that's a board of trustees decision and probably the governor as well. Those things don't happen independent from Boston. I mean, the chancellor obviously has a say in it, as does other senior level managers in the university system. But if they were to say, yes, we do want to build another dormitory, they would have to do a market analysis and figure out, how did this most recent dorm get filled up? Is it being rented? Is there a market for the rents that they're building the way they did this one? I think those are all questions that I would ask myself if I was in that situation. So, but I think I think the thing you identified, I think, is very real to the university, which is affordable, not designated affordable housing for young faculty. Say that's a very important issue for them. They see it as a recruitment issue for them, and It's the same for Amherst College and Hampshire College as well. They are recruiting in a competitive environment for highly talented teachers who are interested in working here. They look at housing prices and they say, I can get more house someplace else maybe. So creating more housing, not just for faculty, but for all levels of staff is high value. Maybe they see that as happening on campus. We can push that, but in terms of neighborhood development, we need to create more opportunities for housing in the town to accommodate folks.
Just want to recognize Dave Zomek, who had raised his hand.
Sure. First off, this is a great conversation, and thank you for having both Paul and myself here. I think a lot has been said. I just kind of wanted to go back to something Paul was mentioning a few minutes ago, which is, really what are those issues that we as a community, what the planning board with support from staff, what are those? Let's identify, let's get those down on paper, those issues that we're trying to solve, because I don't think it's one, it's two. In my mind, it might be 4 or 5 that come together around the quality of life for all people looking for safe, affordable housing in Amherst, whether you're a student, whether you're, as Paul said, a young faculty member, or somebody who works in staff at one of the colleges or one of the local businesses. So I think all of those are critical. I think through my years of speaking with the university and negotiating with the university, I think there's areas of synergy where they overlap, like on faculty housing, student housing, quality of life. So I think if we come to the table with the help of the planning board and planning staff with proposals for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years, I think that could be a very productive conversation if you all are planning, new zoning initiatives, looking toward the future next, say, 5 years, next 10 years. What do we want to do as a community? And then really that's where the conversation starts with the university saying, well, here's where we are. These are the things we can affect in our community through zoning changes. What can you do with your land, with your bond rating, with P3s, potential P3s, and where are those areas that there may be overlap and opportunities for partnership? Land, whether we talk about Olympia Drive, or as Paul mentioned, some of the village centers as is called out in the master plan. It has been a long time since we've talked about the Gateway, and I don't think we should shy away from that area between Kendrick Park and the core campus. It's time to revisit that. I don't know what shape that takes or where that conversation goes, but it's been a long time since we've had serious conversations about that space between our downtown, and we want a vibrant downtown, but we need to talk about that and revisit that conversation. So those are the areas where I think there is mutual interest and we'll find mutual support.
Great. Bruce.
Red Hartwell. Yeah, just a couple of things here. First of all, as you all know, I'm new to coming back to the planning board, having done 2 terms many years ago. But I literally have 50 years of experience in an owner-occupied 3-family in Amherst. And a good proportion of those tenancies, including the 2 tenancies that will be there starting September 1, involve students from the university. And they do not create a problem. And they do not create a problem because it's owner-occupied, and I vet them extensively. So I have a lot of experience with this, literally 50 years. One thing that I want to caution here is nowhere is it written that because the University of Massachusetts chooses not to house a particular student, it is therefore somehow the responsibility of the town of Amherst to create housing for that student. Amherst exists in a surrounding market, and the student who the university refuses to house becomes a commuting student, and they can commute from anywhere. This is a regional issue. And so there is a limit to which Amherst can bend over and try to solve a much broader issue.
So just recognizing that it's 6:44 PM and we're reaching the end point of what we had allocated for this conversation. So if anyone has closing thoughts or summary thoughts, I think we should get to those now. Let me do Bruce and then Karen.
I want this conversation not to end without our having some sort of specific plan for having the planning board have more communication rather than just relying on your talents, which I trust you completely, but I would like to know how you see, how can we invite, yes, it's the trustees and the politicians that determine whether UMass gets enough money to build dormitories. I understand that. But the town, if they were involved in conversations, could become proactive there too and help them and say, look, this is a dire need of this community, that we relieve pressure and have you support the university in having dedicated funds to take care of this housing, and to do it in a way that it's not going to be just dormitories, but that they can be converted should the student population go down, which universities are always fearful of, and that's what the Democrats say. But it, you know, to have these long range, if you say that we need to make proposals, I agree, that would be very constructive. But I think these proposals can work so much better if we could sit down together with them, just as we're sitting down together with you, and I think we understand each other. I think we all have the same goals. We want to do it. We don't want to work out of pressure. We just want to be creative. And if other universities are not doing anything better than us or other towns, so what? We can be a leader in this respect, I think.
Yeah, I think that it's really important for us to say, I think if we're all in agreement that it's about impact on neighborhoods and the sort of impact on single family homes and neighborhoods, that's one thing that we've talked about. And we look at that in different levels. One is what are the, work in those neighborhoods with the students who are living there. And the university puts a lot of efforts. They have neighborhood meetings, and they dedicate staff to helping students who sometimes have never lived on their own, how to be better neighbors to long-term residents. That's an education piece, and and there's always going to be, when you're rubbing up against a university in every university town, there's always that little piece, where the town meets the university, and there's this housing. People want to be close to the university. They want to live as close as they can. So if the question, I think one question is, does the town want to work to provide housing on its own initiative to provide through zoning to accommodate students? We want to solve a problem of, and we may say, not our problem, university fix the problem. That's one option, right? And you need to build more dorms. Will that be successful or not? I don't know. Another approach could be, and these are questions for you to grapple with, should we designate an area of the town where we want housing, dorms, whatever, to be built, and say some communities designate student housing areas. You can zone it that way to say we want to have student housing in this area, and to really encourage it, and to say through our zoning, we want there to be housing in this area. Say Olympia Place, Dave mentioned Olympia Place. Maybe that's something to be said. There's other techniques like which you've talked about many times with the proposals from the counselors. So I just think we want to sort of think through what our goals are. If the goal is strictly, what I hear you saying, Karen, is the university should build more housing on campus, right? If that's, well, the communication part, right? I think that if you want to invite the representatives from the university in, the planning board should feel free to do that. The housing trust did, and they attended, so.
Great. So it seems like in terms of additional communication with the university, we could definitely, as a body, invite them in and ask them questions and move forward a process. And then it does seem like on our purview, we're not the negotiators, but we are long-term policymakers. And so I think this is actually a really good segue to move into the housing conversation, unless anyone disagrees and has more to say about the university piece. Great. Then Doug Marshall, can I invite you back to the table? And I'll hand over the reins to you again.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Dave, for coming. You can certainly stay for the rest of the meeting if you want, but you may want to go home and have your own dinner. Okay, so the time is 6:50. And board members, think about whether you want to put more conversation about that on one of our next agendas so that we can follow up and keep that going along. Bruce.
Just a question. You saw I had a chart that I couldn't hold up and talk. I actually have 3 of them.
Do you want me to hold it up and you can
I
talk to
was
the other
wondering
2?
whether we have, because last time I was in here, we had an easel, a
Yeah.
board that we could put them up. So I would,
Okay.
at some point, if I'd like to, when recognized, speak to what I've thought, but it's surprised me that it's what I had done. I've started been seeing emails from various folks, and it's as though we've been channeling one another.
Yep. Okay. Okay, Janet is here remotely. Okay, welcome, Janet McGowan. We understand you're joining us from quite some distance away. Let's see. So we have a hand from one of the members of the public. So why don't we give Ronnie Parker a chance to say something? Hold on a minute until we get set up here and yeah, we'll just have to wait to sort of approximate the time. So Ronnie, please hold on for a minute until we get the boards or the displays that Bruce has put together set up and you can have everybody's attention. Okay, so Ronnie, please introduce yourself and give us your street address. And you have approximately 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Parker, North Prospect Street. I actually raised my hand in the beginning because I had a question related to the earlier presentation. Can I still say that?
Sure.
My internet froze, which is another issue to be discussed for Amherst. But I was wondering if there was any documentation when the town manager or other town staff meet with UMass officials, if there are any records of these meetings. I assume there are, and if they are, it seems that they ought to be available to the public, and I'm not sure why we cannot see them. And I think a lot of the mystery would be removed if we could see them. And then because I am coming in after I heard some of the comments, I'm a little troubled that at this stage, the leadership of our town is saying, what's really the issue with students? I think that there's been so much community feedback about various issues, but I can tell you for myself, I love the students being here. I like the diversity they bring. I like the energy they bring. I don't mind that they talk loudly. I remember I was like that too at some point in life. I think the problem really has to do with how their housing is managed. And oftentimes they're ripped off. They're desperate, they need a place to stay. They get little tiny spaces that are not adequate, that they pay exorbitant amounts for. Then they go into debt. And what for? So that some people can make profits off of spaces they don't want to maintain. So that's my bigger issue with student housing. I really think it's something that we as residents of Amherst I feel personally responsible that my institutions, my town government is not managing this better, that somehow we're not able to ensure that the students who are here can get good housing, and also that they can be monitored so that they in turn can be held accountable as young adults, teenagers, whatever, where they live, so they don't trash the place, etc. So I do feel in the summer when they're gone, I really miss them because I think the students are such a big part. All the richness they bring, the art, the music, all of that stuff matters a lot to me. But I am torn because it seems like a nurse's family or a teacher's family cannot afford to live here. And I heard recently about a town school official who actually turned down her job offer because even with two professional incomes, they couldn't afford a house in Amherst. So that kind of thing bothers me. In the long term, I think that we need multi-generational residents, and we don't have that anymore. So I hope that's within my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Okay. Bruce, I guess we're going to move on to the next item in the agenda, which is planning for housing growth. And this is the third sort of conversation the board has had, but the first one with Jesse and Fred joining us. In the packet, we included the minutes from the previous two meetings, just so everybody was sort of reminded of what we've talked about in the past. And it sounds like, Bruce, you did some actual preparation produce some materials. Maybe you should just tell us what you did, and we'll continue. But I think before you start, one of the things I know there seems to be some question with some members of the public about whether these conversations are going to be a continuation of the sort of duplex and triplex bylaw deliberations we did over the past 6 or 8 months, or whether we are kind of breaking from that. We voted on that proposal, and whether we're going to try to think about it in a different way. So I think one of my objectives for this evening is that we, probably canvass everybody about that and come away with some clarity for our listening audience in terms of where do we think things ought to be headed. So with that, Bruce, why don't you show us your three sheets?
Thanks, Doug. I guess we could start, or I could start by saying, from my point of view, the place where we are taking off from the 6 months of discussion from the proposed changes to the bylaw is simply from the goal, the very first paragraph that we saw in January. The goal of the two councillors was to produce more units of affordable workforce and family housing in Amherst. That's my characterization of it, but I think it's accurately reflected. It was something that I recall we all agreed that was a good goal. It was a worthy goal. And from then on, we weren't so impressed, and as I recall, neither were the bulk of the public commentary. There was a second goal that seemed to arise out of the concern that the bylaw proposed changes might have, and that was we were concerned that to preserve neighborhood coherence, vitality, integrity, all of those adjectives. And I particularly, and I think many others, were concerned that that was that might be a casualty. And so that was when I began my study of other towns. And initially I was driven by this concern because I was thinking about how we could make those proposed changes work. And there were a number of strategies, but I have dug up two strategies that seek to reduce student rentals in established neighborhoods, reducing the number of them basically, and therefore making it less of a disruptive presence in the neighborhood. One way to do that is reducing the number of cohabiting unrelated individuals that's allowed. I think we have 3 at this point, something like that, 4. I discovered a month or so ago that Ithaca has 1 and 2, and they don't have any problems of the concerns that the residents in this town have, and very probably it's because they've adopted that regulation, and it's been enforced for many years apparently. On the other hand, we just read in the newspaper that Paul circulated that Boulder has gone in exactly the other direction, up to 5. The second strategy that one can think of is this minimum distancing spacing requirements in student rentals. So you only allow 1 every 10 lots or something like that. Not going to go into the problems in association with that, but each of these has the effect of actually reducing the amount of housing. And I think as we began to think more broadly about this with the 2 previous sessions, it seemed to me that those were not directions that we wanted to go in, and certainly not directions that we should want to go in if we want to achieve this goal as opposed to this goal. If this becomes the driver, then it would seem to me anyway that reducing the pressure to create student rental conversions of existing single-family housing. So if we can reduce the pressure on the districts, and it seems that pressure could best be reduced by creating more purpose-built student housing, denser multifamily apartments in locations that are most desirable for students. So that seems to be where I am at the moment. And insofar as that goal remains important. And then I just took this from our previous meetings. All of the conversations that we previously had, these were the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 locations that we identified in conversation. They weren't listed like that. It just cropped up in the series of the 2 meetings. I think I got them all. It doesn't mean there aren't many others.
Why don't you read the 7 locations? Because not everyone on the
and
Zoom can see them.
And let me make sure that I understood them correctly. So if the designation needs to be further refined, but the first, and they're just in order of how they appeared in our minutes. The first was north of UMass in the Puffton Brandywine area. Doug, I think that was yours. So you could amplify what you mean by that. The second was University Drive south of Amity. I'm not sure on which side it was. There was some further discussion about that, but the third is East Amherst at the Southeast Street, Route 9, Belchertown area along Belchertown Road mostly, I think. But also, you might go back here. The number 7 was north side of College Street in the commercial zone. That's in that general area, but back up Route 9, College Street towards town. The fourth was South Amherst around perhaps along Pomeroy Lane. The fifth was in the existing RF zone, which I think is the Olympia Drive zone, Olympia Drive area. And the last on this list was the North Pleasant Street Gateway. And two of those, possibly Nate mentioned, might be candidates for 40R overlay districts. So that's a summary that I've extracted from our previous minutes. And I just put them up here because I thought we could reflect on them quickly. We wouldn't have to remember them so much. And if we want to, which is why I wanted to stick it up here, I could write more down there if we wanted to just keep that conversation
Right.
public, not well, public, yes, but also in our collective consciousness.
Okay. Great, Bruce. Jesse, you had raised your hand at one point during Bruce talking.
Thanks. Sort of backing up to your, thank you for that. It's very clarifying. So I've been trying to read back through the minutes and get caught up to speed with a lot of these conversations. And I had a couple of questions, not directly related to what you presented, but for the board. And please just say, oh, we've talked about that. Here's where you can find it if it's already been conversations. I was surprised to see the number of states and towns and municipalities that have caps on rental licensing. Apparently that's a legal thing you can do as a town. You can say we only want so many rental permits allowed. And further, you can take that by neighborhood. And so I was wondering if that's ever come up in the planning board, because it seems to me a way to accomplish or potentially push towards both of these larger goals. If you limit the number of, following up on that, you can designate units as student rentals that can then be regulated legally. You limit those in, say, a particular neighborhood. If there are other rentals, they won't be driven by the student market and could potentially be more affordable for families, staff, whoever. Likewise, it could reduce the buying market because developers have much less incentive to try and scoop up all the houses if they know they won't be able to get new permits. So again, it's really just a question for us. Is that something that's come up? Is this something we'd be interested in pursuing as?
So my personal response to that is, I don't think we've talked about that as a board. I don't remember that coming up. I would wonder, and we would look for Chris and staff to help us, whether that the planning board has usually dealt with the zoning issues rather than administration of rental permit. That was more in the general bylaw. And so it was more the province of town council to do with whatever staff was supporting them.
Right.
So that may be something that the town could look at, but I'm not sure it's something we would deal with. But it's an idea we could put forward.
I understand what you're saying. I was wondering if then, would it be our purview to say, well, this neighborhood, we want this percent rentals. This other neighborhood, we want more, because it's along the lines of encouraging development in those directions. I see it as a long-term piece that could help move.
Okay.
Again, if it's not
So
on-
right now, there's no limit on anywhere. So they're happening kind of wherever the opportunity exists and there's sufficient demand.
But that's the opportunity. Maybe it's not the planning board purview, but maybe it is. Say, well, we want these different neighborhoods to have some number capped, and we want other neighborhoods to have a different number capped, so that in 5 years, the landscape's different. But again, maybe that's not our.
Yeah, I don't know. Brad?
The town has the authority to zone. I strongly doubt that the town has any legal authority to ration rental permits. I can see, I cannot, remember, a municipality is a creature of the state. And when it exercises legislative authority, it does so within the boundaries that are set forth by the state legislature. And I'm not aware of any enabling legislation that would allow that kind of rationing of the availability for a property owner to execute a lease.
I mean, I think that that's an interesting idea. I think it would be helpful for Chris, can you guys kind of investigate that a little bit? Or
Yeah, we can investigate that, but I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think that the planning board can, via zoning, limit the number of rental houses in a neighborhood by saying you can't have one, every 300 feet, you can only have one every 500 feet or whatever. So that's reasonable. I think we would not want to limit the number of rental permits given because we've just established this system of requiring rental permits, and we want to encourage landlords to get the rental permits. And if we start limiting them, I think it's going to be dissuading for the landlords to get the permits. And the permits tell us where these houses are and allow us to know more about who's responsible for them. So I wanted to say that. I also wanted to say that the CRC has been working for the last year on developing a new rental registration bylaw. And it involves much more scrutiny of rental properties and more elevated fees for rental permits. But it also requires more inspectors. So the town is currently trying to figure out, well, how are we going to balance this? How are we going to get enough money to set this program up, this more rigorous program, and, be able to hire more inspectors to do this work? So I think that's something that the Finance Committee just talked about, and the Town Council will be talking about it soon. So that these things are being worked on. They're just not in place yet. So I think, some of what you have said is possible. Spreading out the housing, the student housing, that's, been done all over the country, and I think we could probably do that. But limiting the number of licenses or permits, I don't think is probably a way to go, because we don't want to dissuade people from getting those permits.
okay, Bruce.
Actually, Jesse's idea is very similar to the minimum distancing type of regulation. And I said I wasn't going to go into this and I won't very much. But one of the things I've learned in conversations, particularly with the planning director at State College and also the planning director in Newark, Delaware, who have gone in for this strategy, it's problematic because you're creating a scarce resource. If you say you can only have a certain number of permits, either by introducing minimum distancing restrictions or simply putting a cap, that scarce resource is problematic in that we would likely have to withstand legal challenges that we were restricting business or taking or those sorts of things. And in fact, I think so far as the minimum distancing, there are certain areas in federal jurisdictions where that has been deemed not allowed. So I understand it hasn't yet made its way to the Supreme Court, and if it did, it might become a national prescription. So it's at the moment it's only a prescription in certain federal districts. But that's the terrain we are in when we enter that particular group of strategies, I believe.
I mean, there's sort of two ways to implement something like that. One is with the intent to guide where the students live, not to cap the number of students in town. And the other way is to use it to restrict the number of students in town and make it more scarce as a resource. So if you say, okay, I want to, if we went through Bruce's first chart and figured out that, okay, there's demand for 12,000 beds for students within Amherst. And then we looked and we saw, well, there's 12,000 houses that are rented, but they're distributed all over the place, and we really want to put them all over there. So we could theoretically, we would say to some areas, okay, you have fewer, you can have fewer rental units in your area. But we'd have to say to some other areas, right now, there are 100 units and you need to have 1,000, right? And so that essentially means we need to allow them to build bigger and higher. And so we could do that even without talking about the limitation or the imposition of the rental, caps. We could just say to some areas, like some of the areas that Bruce has listed in his second, here's where we would like to relax the zoning so that we will allow bigger developments, and the students would be drawn there, and presumably some of them would leave more distant places or less desirable places and end up where we want them. So that's one of my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah, I was going to say the RKG study in 2015 is the comprehensive housing study, talks more about kind of the real estate market and housing. And so they did mention if you're going to have stricter regulations, as Doug just mentioned, loosen them somewhere else. So if you're going to have, limit number of rentals in the neighborhood, allow someplace where you can build it. And so, I mean, I think Paul asked a really great question, and I was hoping tonight we talk about it. Do we want students off campus, right? The magnitude of the problem is 5,000 beds, right? 6,000 beds, whatever it is, right? There's amount of beds that are needed to satisfy the student housing market. And the study said that it really drives the market in Amherst. And so if we're talking about rezoning Amherst along Route 9, and we want to say we want to have a gateway into town and we want 3-4-story buildings, they can look nice. We can have a great streetscape, but they might mostly be students because that's what the market is. And so is that okay? Or can we do both? Can we also allow places in town or other, places where we can actually have student housing, like designated student housing? And so I think there's a little bit of both, right? There can be a balance of let's allow density somewhere for students and let's rezone village centers where maybe we can get other types of housing for different demographics. But I mean, I don't think one can happen without the other. I think it's a balance. I think there needs to be multiple approaches happening at the same time. And so, Jesse, you forwarded that article. I think it had a lot of good strategies. I think it's things that we can investigate. I think Bruce is probably looking at that with other communities. And so I was just going to mention that this 2015 study did reference certain, other college towns that had tried things and what they found. But
is that study on the town website somewhere? Maybe if you guys could send us the link, because
Sure.
I think I'm not sure I've ever seen it, or it's been a while if I have. RKG?
It's the 2015 comprehensive housing study. It's linked through the Housing Trust webpage, but we could send it around.
Okay.
Or the market housing study.
Okay.
Just wanted to clarify 2 things. The first was, I hope I did not come off as wanting not to have students in town. Not at all, my position. And I definitely think it's the latter that you brought up about directing where they might go. I feel like that's what we're trying to do, right?
Mhm.
And what gets lost in some of these other strategies is the preservation of neighborhoods. So if we just allow more over here, that's a long-term project, which it has to be. And it doesn't help the short-term problem, which is houses being bought up quickly by the investors. I mean, this month I got 6 calls from people wanting to buy my house or one of my houses. They're investment groups from Boston, right? And so it's happening very quickly. I know that's not our purview to make quick action necessarily, but I was surprised to learn that you can permit like that. At least maybe it's being challenged, I don't know. But I saw it as potentially a way for us to help stem some of that.
So
short term.
I also want to come back to, I think, a comment you had made, Fred, which was that you saw the housing, that it wasn't Amherst's responsibility to house all the students, or as many students as wanted to live here, and that it was just fine for us to say, this is all we want in town, and Sunderland and Hadley and East Hampton and where Belchertown can all deal with where they go. I personally feel from a sustainability point of view that I want to minimize the number of people who have to commute, the number of miles they have to drive a car, even if it's an electric car, because that car is using energy that probably could be used somewhere else. And so I would just as soon have I would like us to be able to house and accommodate as many people as want to live near the university, who want to live near Amherst College, who want to live near downtown. And we know that the more of those people are densely together, the more likely they're going to generate some demand for business in the first floor of those mixed use buildings that we're trying to encourage. So my personal opinion is, yeah, Amherst ought to build more housing, and whether we can ever build enough, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people who say, well, we built a bunch in the last 10 years and it hasn't made the housing market perfect, but it feels to me like we haven't done, we're going to have to build a lot before the rents in Amherst come down. We might build some and the rent in Hadley goes down, or the rent in Sunderland goes down, because we'll be drawing people away from those outlying districts into town, and then the demand stays for the town. But at some point, there would be an effect on the Amherst housing market. Karen.
Yeah, I think we should definitely focus on where we want to encourage student housing, that it's not going to impact the town so much. I like Olympia Drive a lot. I think the university has to also step up and make a commitment. But Jesse, what you said about the short-term problem and how do we protect ourselves in the short term, that's really a key issue, because if we don't protect ourselves in the short term, there's a lot that's going to be destroyed that won't come back. And we see the schools having less and less children. There we see families moving out one after another. We see one house after another sort of deteriorating, becoming a student thing. And so we can't build fast enough to protect ourselves. So we need to talk about two things. We need to, where are we going to direct housing? We do need to build housing. We do need to relax zoning in those places and encourage it. But we also have to have a solution for the short term.
Jesse, did anybody else have anything?
I'll just reiterate, that's what was one of the attractive things about regulating student rentals separately. If you were going to distribute them unequally in our neighborhoods, it could have that effect of lessening the rental or the pressure of purchasing and rental in those neighborhoods where there's fewer.
Okay.
Let's say that again.
All right. Johanna.
This is such an interesting conversation. I'm really enjoying it. A couple of my thoughts and reactions so far. I agree with Doug on the sustainability impacts. I think we want students and staff and faculty living as close to the university as possible so that they don't have to get in a car to get there. And I think there's the added economic benefits that our town gets from just having more people living downtown. I am intrigued by the kind of carrot and stick approach. So, discourage student rentals in some parts of town, encourage them, or, really just like make it blatant that you want it in another part of town. The one way I'm like intrigued by the reductions in the number of cohabiting people and like ratcheting that down in some parts of town potentially. The minimum distance one makes me a little bit more uncomfortable, in part because a lot of neighborhoods have already, like, this has happened. And I think they would just be like, you'd be grandfathered in to whatever is there now, unless those houses get sold. So, and then having it just be a limitation on the number of rentals strikes me as problematic, because you can't just say student rentals, right? It would be, can you? Interesting. Okay. Right. I guess I'll just say there are a lot of people besides students who are renters, right? So, and so I want to make sure that we're not, I don't know, aiming too broad in that. And then ultimately, I think, like, so all those stick approaches I think are interesting, but I think what Amherst really needs to grapple with is where are we going to add the housing that we need? If we want to build, let's say, 5,000 units over the course of the next 5 or 10 years, that's going to happen somewhere in town, and there's going to be significant pushback from a lot of the people who don't want things to change. And I think that's something we really need to reckon with.
Fred,
Yeah, couple things. And this just popped into my head. It, I think there's a lot of merit to a a designation that accommodates what we call student rentals. And what popped into my head is we actually have one in the bylaw sort of now, and that's RF, fraternity housing. It's just that nobody wants to be in fraternities and sororities very much anymore, and so that's kind of moribund. And
well, that area has been where two
yeah, right. Yeah,
two
yeah,
residence halls have been built in the last
yeah, exactly.
8 years.
Yeah, so there's a model for that, and I think that has a lot of merit. I want to be sure that that we, when I applied for the planning board, I quoted the Joni Mitchell song lyric, "You don't know what you got till it's gone," and thinking in terms of the Victorian neighborhoods in town, and the master plan takes this into account. We want to try and protect those, but there is ways to accommodate this, and I think the areas that Bruce put up on the board there are interesting. I will also want to caution the business about distance from the university and so forth. I point out the university is in the northwest corner of the town. And, there are a lot of locations in the town of Hadley, for example, that are a lot closer than South Amherst. So let's not go too far with that analysis.
Sounds good. Bruce, and then I had one thought kind of on a new topic.
I'm have been interested in the student home designation that we should generate a definition of a student home. But I have to say I've cooled on it a little as I've talked to folks in other places that what I guess I've come to realize a bit, and I imagine that you two would realize a lot more, is that these kind of designations feedback on the staff. They have to police it or control it or understand it, and those towns that have successfully done that have a significant commitment of staff time to make it work, and so that's something we have to bear in mind. It doesn't come free. Seemed like a good idea to me, but as I say now, I'm getting a little less warm to it.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that? Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm aware of the CRC's proposal anyway. And yes, I think it's all a step in the right direction. I think we do need more staff to manage this issue. Absolutely. My sense of the direction as a town we should go in, because I think there are a lot of issues. I think the town could benefit more than we are already from the rental situation. Permitting fees is one way, but yeah, I'm not unaware of that, and I think it's a great long-term goal.
Okay. So the thing I wanted to say was something kind of triggered from what Paul was saying and the conversation with you. At least two of those sort of precincts that are on Bruce's list abut the university or university land. So, and I'm thinking of University Drive, and I'm thinking of the North Pleasant Street Gateway corridor. So in both of those instances, a way for us to perhaps engage the university would be to come to them and say, here's what we want to do with the zoning for the land that's, say, on University Drive south of Amherst. We want to create, a new boulevard that has 20-foot sidewalks and, a street tree every 50 feet. Would you be willing to continue that on your land or on Pleasant Street? If we zoned let's call it the west side of North Pleasant Street as you go north from Kendrick Park, because that's where most of that land is town-owned. If we zoned that for 4-story buildings that had a 20-foot front and, whatever the street we wanted to create was, and whether it was mixed use or not, that's directly opposite from where the frats used to be on that big lawn area that the university owns. So those would be two instances in which I think the planning board could come and say to the university, here's what we want to do. How do you feel about, how would you respond in terms of what you would build along your land, contiguous, so that together we create a successful street or a successful boulevard or whatever. So I just throw that out. And, I think that's a more productive, that's probably something that's more easier for the university to think about than for us to come and just say, how can we advocate for you to build more housing? So, yeah, Jesse.
That literally was the next bullet point I had to bring up. Exactly what you said. So I think about that strip all the time because I ride by it every day. And I think that's.
Well, I ride on it twice a day myself.
It's the prime opportunity.
Actually,
to do-
today was either 4 or 6 times, but
So I'm in complete agreement about that specific area and approaching the university with that kind of plan. I feel like that's a great spot for development. Called the Gateway area, right?
yeah, that was the name 10 years ago when it was studied and very controversial.
Fantastic. Related to that, again, it's just a question, an information question. Is it possible for the town to do public-private buildings the way UMass, the new stuff at the end of Lincoln? Is that something that's ever happened? Is that possible legally? I have no idea.
My guess is that the university was able to do it because they own the land. And so they bring to the table the land, and that's sort of their contribution to the deal.
Right. So I'm wondering if the town owns land.
Like does the town own land like the new golf course? Like could we do a public-private partnership on the golf course land?
Aren't we sort of doing a public-private partnership on Belchertown Road and A Street School? We have a project going there with the Wayfinders that builds affordable housing, and some of it is market rate and some of it is going to be affordable. And I think that's our public-private partnership because we bought that land on Belchertown Road specifically for that purpose. I think it was 750,000 or something like that. So the town does do those kinds of projects.
And there's the VFW too, right? Was that headed toward housing or was that headed toward something else, I think? Dave?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think Chris was spot on that in a sense, we do that. We're not housing developers. We're not developers at all. And we should stay out of that arena. But there have been strategic acquisitions like Belchertown Road, as Chris mentioned, and then Doug was just mentioning the property of the VFW. Our goal there would be to do some of the preliminary site design, some of the conceptual work in advance, and then put out an RFP to bring in a developer like Valley CDC, a Wayfinder, Home City, and the list goes on. We have great potential partners in the region, and that would be kind of the way that would play out. And we have some other property that we are looking at throughout town. We have the old South Amherst School on the Common in South Amherst. We're doing some comprehensive study plan work at Hickory Ridge. So yeah, we've got some potential projects on the tarmac and a few years away, probably.
Great. So Nate,
Sure. Just quickly on, if we're talking about the North Pleasant Street area, I think the town, in terms of how do we incentivize development we want, it would be through, say, zoning or other regulations. I don't think the town would want to then become the purchaser. We're limited in terms of how much we can purchase the property for. Then there's this public process and procurement. And so really, could we incentivize it through other mechanisms? Is zoning one of them? Is what else is available to us? Is there, overlay zone? Is there financial incentives? And so, I think the town could help facilitate, but I don't think it would be the developer or property owner, right? So I think the town could have a role in it, maybe not the same way that UMass worked with their developer on the new building on Mass Ave.
Sorry, it was actually related but separate question. I wasn't thinking of that land particularly, like buying it to develop it. I was wondering if that's something we can think about as we look at other areas.
yeah, sounds like they've got some of that going on. Yeah, Dave.
I forgot, we do have one other tool that we've used at least once, which is we worked with Beacon and the Coles Company up in North Amherst, and we did a TIF, a tax increment financing deal, where we gave them basically reduced taxes over a 10-year period, and that incentivized 130 units in the North Square with 26 affordable. So that was a great project.
Okay, lots to think about. I'm seeing that it's 25 to 8. Just trying to, are people feeling like this has come to a spot where we should sort of ruminate on it for a little while, or should we move on or not? Or should we just sit here for a minute and then people will have new round of thoughts? Bruce.
I'd like to try and add to that list of possible locations. And I guess these are non-UMass locations, although as I live in North Amherst and drive variously along East or North Pleasant Street, I do pass a lot of UMass land. I don't know the area around Tilson Farm and opposite the police station on, I guess, Orchard Hill, on the north side of Orchard Hill. There seems to be, particularly that latter, there just seems to be a gorgeous location for housing. But I don't, that would be one of the things, for example, I would like to find out in our conversations with the university, which all suggests that we engage upon. And if we do, I would expect that we would think carefully about what we would want to talk about. And I would like to know what parts of the campus are potentially more or less likely to be suitable in their eyes for housing. So I keep thinking about that. But for tonight, I wonder whether there are other places that we imagine. And I guess that the question then would become, I think, as we fill out a list like that, then how can the town, what are the mechanisms that we have to encourage a certain type of development in each of those locations? So that's a kind of rather specific brainstorming, but so my methodology here is to expand that list, and then on the right-hand side of it, notionally, not tonight, but would be to say, well, on that site, given where it is and how big it is, and all sorts of other factors, trying to imagine, think like a developer, I suppose, what would be most suitable, and then what mechanisms do we have that could incentivize what we imagine would be most suitable. So there's a sequence there. It's a large piece of work, but that's where I'm thinking I want us to go in the next couple, in these conversations we're having, and that would be a product.
Yep.
And my guess is that Chris and Nate and probably your predecessors and others have already thought about this. And I am not lost on what Fred said about neighboring towns and what is our,
Mhm.
because that's the dead center one there is satisfying this housing in adjacent towns. Because there are parts of Sunderland and parts of Hadley that are quite close, which would satisfy, I think, yours and Johanna's reasonable aspirations in that regard. So I don't know how we can get to
So would, oh,
local
Chris,
towns, but I think we could perhaps think collectively tonight about where else in town we could imagine denser housing happening.
Chris?
Yeah, I think we already have an idea of that. In fact, we have developers who come and talk to us about various properties that they are interested in developing, but the zoning doesn't really encourage them to do that. And so I would like to be able to share that with the planning board members, not necessarily who the developers are and exactly what they want to do, but the ideas that if we expand, particularly Business Village Center seems to be a really good zoning district to allow things to happen. And if we allowed that to take more of the East Amherst Village Center rather than commercial zoning that we have now, that's fairly limiting as far as what types of development you can do there. So that would be one thing. And perhaps, using that type of zoning for parts of University Drive, or maybe developing a new type of zoning, since University Drive isn't really designated as a village center, but there might be something similar to Business Village Center that we could use there. So I think we do have ideas about that, and we have some interested developers who want to do things in what we consider to be appropriate locations, but they're just held back by the zoning. So I think that's definitely a conversation we can have.
Are there kind of areas of town that maybe you and Nate and the other planners have always kind of thought about? Because to me, the list that Bruce put together is a pretty complete list in terms of the places that I've thought about. Dave, I saw your hand start to raise.
No, I would agree. I think it's a great list. I'm not saying these are high priority, but if we follow the master plan, we have these village centers, and we've left out a couple here. I think there's potentially some areas of North Amherst and the village center in North Amherst that could be redeveloped. So always thinking about, not necessarily brownfield sites, but redevelopment as opposed to, green fields. There's still some land in the Atkins Village corner, not a lot, but there's some land that could be redeveloped there. And then we really haven't talked much about Cushman, but it is called out in the master plan, and there are some potential sites there. Again, not on bus lines and a little bit farther afield. But when we think about senior affordable housing, senior housing in general, which is a real need in town, we certainly have had some conversations about Cushman with seniors in mind.
Thanks. In the spirit of brainstorming and just other locations, when I think about the master plan, it says village centers, but it also says downtown. And I think there are a couple of parts of downtown where we could just do more to encourage density. I'm thinking specifically Kellogg Street, North Pleasant Street along Kendrick Park, so opposite the street from where some of the newer 5-story buildings are. And I think there could potentially be, density along the park and then scaling down into the historic neighborhood. And then the north end of Kendrick Park, where when I was starting on the planning board, we were talking about a 40R kind of in that, right now it's the Bank of America, some low slung buildings and parking lots around Cottage Street. And that's just prime location that is currently underutilized. So those are 3 locations for downtown where I think zoning could do more. I think Route 9, there's certainly the South Amherst Village Center, But, you know, for this, again, this isn't student housing, so this gets more at the reducing the pressure and potentially creating workforce and family housing. But I could imagine thinking about the the East Amherst Village Center as one zone, but then Route 9 all the way to Gatehouse Lane as a corridor. Gatehouse is where the Hampshire Athletic Club is. So it doesn't go all the way to the dump, but going east. So those are some additional ideas to throw in the hopper.
All right. Karen,
Okay, I think we have to sort of prioritize. You're going to scare a lot of people because we're also really concerned about preserving town. And if you open up so many places for student housing, what you're going to do is you're going to lose the residential flair of Amherst. Yes, we want density, but how are you going to get density, the kind that you want without, I mean, these student houses are driving another section of our population out. We've got to realize that. I live there. I see it every day. So I agree we need places. What you said about UMass, what about this land along 116? You could have a roundabout. You could access the parking lots of UMass, you know, where they have the tennis courts, that whole area. There's a lot of land there that could be developed into student housing, done in a nice way so that young faculty could also live there. So while we're going and brainstorming where housing should go, we should prioritize first places that won't have the danger of you know, impacting the preservation of our town. Olympia Drive is a place that I would say is really prime.
so
and maybe we should
University Drive
contemplate.
would be fine with you.
University Drive, to me, I don't see that as hurting residential areas. I don't know. I don't see.
So when you say preserve, you don't
preserve
mean,
residential. So for example, the North Plaza, the Gateway, why was it controversial? There's obviously a whole group of people there that feel threatened by that kind of development. Maybe it should happen, but why don't we start with places that are more neutral? If we're going to, you know, it can't just all happen at once.
okay, Chris, and I see our one member of the public has her hand up too.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I also think that we should look at our PRP zoning district. The PRP zoning district was established a long time ago with the great hope that we would have economic development and that we would have businesses going there. And so far, we've had very limited success with that. And right now, I'm hearing that, you know, office space is going, you know, not free, but it's not being occupied. So reconsidering where we have our PRP zoning districts, not for student housing, but for other types of housing, such as elderly housing. I have been talking to a developer who has some land in the PRP who would like to develop elderly housing there, but can't because housing isn't allowed. So I think that we really should look at that land again and think about, is this really what we want to do with this property, or is it going to provide an opportunity for us to build more housing, not for students, but for other sectors of the society?
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to go to our member of the public. Could you give us your name and your address, assuming you live in town?
Yeah, Maura Keene, 25 Dennis Drive, and I have a close friend's son come visit with his family. He visited a lot when he was a kid and played with my kids, but now he's in his mid-30s and has kids of his own. And so he hasn't been here in maybe 15 years. And he said, what happened to Amherst? It is so ugly downtown. Now, he lives in Brooklyn, so it's not like he's like from, but he said, are they trying to become Brooklyn or New York City? Because he was talking about the high buildings that are built right up to the sidewalk with no landscaping or anything that wasn't there when he used to come to Amherst. And so I really would caution about taking down the rest of those houses and building more of those on the other side of Kendrick Park. There are plenty of other places to build higher buildings. I guess Colonial Village is going to expand, Chris said. And that's very appropriate. Or if you look at the new apartment complex on Southeast Street, that looks really nice. And I guess he wants to do another one across the street. So more power to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Maura. Nate?
Sure, thanks. I was just gonna go kind of reiterate something that, I think zoning, we could, Bruce, when you were talking, I took some notes. It's kind of like, how can we control the type of housing or regulate the type of housing that's built and what does it look like? But then it's also like, typically zoning doesn't get to the end user. So who are the residents? What types of residents? And maybe it can, it's kind of unique in Amherst, especially that we have the student market, but, could we incentivize senior housing? Is there a way to regulate through zoning the number of bedrooms, the size of bedrooms, or the proportion of different size units in a development so that it's not all studios or all singles? So, are there ways to try to get at what kind of housing and the end user who we want to be without, being discriminatory or something illegal? I mean, right now the market has shifted. 10 years ago, we saw a lot of 3 and 4 units being developed and then rented as a suite style living. And now the new ones are studios and ones because, everyone wants their own bathroom. And then I think developers realized they could charge more per unit on a 500 square foot studio than, a 4-bedroom. And so, some of it is I like the idea of where can we allow density. I think these conversations are great. I think that, it's like the exciting part of planning, right? Like, can we think broad and long term? But then some of it is we typically don't get into the end user. And, I think what the planning board felt with Pat and Mandy's proposal is their goal was great, and Bruce has it up there, but it wasn't going to achieve, the zoning amendment wasn't going to achieve possibly what they're hoping for in terms of missing middle or different levels of affordability and demographics in town. And I like the idea of where can we rezone. I still want to be cognizant that if we don't change things, whether it's increase our inclusionary zoning bylaw or some other measures, it'll probably be mostly student housing, right? So if we allow Route 9 to be redeveloped into 3-story mixed-use buildings and has street trees and we have nice wide sidewalks and it could look beautiful, I think most of it is going to be student housing unless we, have students living somewhere else. I think the demand is at a scale that, having a few hundred units here and a few hundred units there is really not going to change much in terms of the end user. And so, I think we could look at what are some other ways to try to incentivize or regulate the end user. And it's tricky because, there's fair housing and we want to be really careful of that, but, maybe there are ways we could do it. So I like these ideas. I think senior housing is something that, people like aging in place, but it's an aging population in the Northeast. I bet if we had hundreds of units for senior housing, they could be occupied, and that could maybe free up single family homes for younger families, just possibly, right? But we don't have that right now. And how do you incentivize that? How do you zone for it? I'm not sure. Is there a way to zone for it specifically for that? But
Yeah, most of the people that I know who have sort of aged out of their house, they move out of town to some facility that's out of town. Anyway. Okay, so we're creeping up on 8 o'clock. Maybe this feels like this is probably a reasonable place to stop for tonight. So we'll have a similar meeting in a month here, starting at 6 o'clock. But you're going to be out of town. In a month, you will be gone. So we won't have the benefit of your illustrative. Okay. Okay. All right. So maybe we'll get Janet next month. All right. So with that, I guess we'll stop for tonight on this topic. We can always come back to it. We can put sort of this kind of thing on one of our regular meetings when we're typically on Zoom and just continue the conversation. Yeah, that was a good segue, Karen. The next regularly scheduled meeting is in a week, but Chris, do you want to say what we sort of thought we would propose?
Yes, we're going to propose that we not meet in a week because we don't have any public hearings scheduled for September 6th. And since we've met already 3 times in August, maybe we could take a week off and not meet again until September 20th. And we do have a public hearing scheduled for that night. So how about that? Would everybody agree to that?
So I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be out of town, so that's fine with me. But if you guys want to meet, by the end of the meeting, we'll have a new slate of our officers and somebody else can preside. So I'm not seeing any objections to canceling next week's meeting. So has that been advertised yet? Oh, okay. Okay, so stay home next week or don't turn on your Zoom next week. All right, so the time now is 7:54. And we'll go to the third item on the agenda, which was Planning Board elections and reorganization. So we have 3 officers, a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. And then we have our representatives to the various liaison boards that we interact with, the DRB, the CPAC. I'm trying to do this by memory. PVPC, solar bylaw. Okay, and you are CRC. So
Solar bylaw working group is probably going to be going away as of October 6th, I think.
okay, and
But
Janet's
Janet
been
wants to
serving
be
on
on
that
that.
for so long. It probably doesn't make sense.
No,
I mean, we should nominate her. Is kind of how I feel. But
she's made that
okay, so
clear. Yeah.
so do we want to start? I guess with the chair. Does anybody want to?
I nominate Doug Marshall continue as chair of the planning board.
Thank you, Johanna. I don't think it's appropriate for me to second that.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Bruce. Well, I'm willing to keep doing it. I'm fine if somebody else really wanted to do it instead, but I'm fine with doing it. So do we need to have a formal vote? I'm not seeing any other candidates put forward.
I guess we could ask, are there other candidates who wish to be put forward?
Okay,
let's then have a
so
vote.
by consensus, I guess. Thank you all. Well, Janet, did she, oh, she disappeared. Yeah, she's not there anymore. She had sent us an email earlier about solar bylaw working group and didn't mention anything about chair. Okay. Yeah, 6. Okay, so moving on, we typically have a vice chair, and the vice chair would be the one that would fill in for me if I'm absent and we still need to meet. I was going to suggest Johanna because she's been the clerk for a year and was so good at that figured you could be vice chair. Does anybody? Karen is seconding that. Anybody else want to be vice chair for the next year? Nope, nobody's jumping up. Another consensus uncontested nomination. So that leaves clerk. And we don't have we had a clerk, we just lost her. So the clerk has typically not really done anything except the one year when we got way behind on minutes, we asked the clerk to do a little more helping than the rest of us did because we all ended up doing a set of minutes here and there. Yes, well, she did. That's right. Before she turned into the vice chair. So is there anybody that, I mean, like I said, it's really just a title. I don't think you'll have to do anything. You willing, Bruce? Okay. I'll second that. Happy to have Bruce as our illustrious clerk. Okay. Oh, I guess I did. Yeah. Did I? Mr. Coldham volunteered. He raised his forefinger and volunteered to be clerk. And I think I seconded. Okay. You jumped in. You jumped into the fray. It seems to be. We're a pretty unanimated group here for our annual elections. Okay, so now let's go through the okay, so Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, it took us, what, months and months to get you onto this. Could you please stay on it? So, yeah, so I would like to nominate Bruce to be the our representative to the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. All right. And then okay, Design Review Board. So Design Review Board, do you all know exactly what they do? Okay, so that's I mean, you should probably explain what they do because I know some of what they do.
So mainly they review changes to the downtown, any place within the BG zoning district or the limited business BL zoning districts that's adjacent to BG, that has to do with exterior changes to architecture. They also review all the signs that are proposed by the businesses downtown. And within the 150 feet of the town common, they also review things like paint color and things like that. They also review any projects that the town proposes. So, you know, even if the town proposes to build a new building out on the DPW landfill site, the DRB would review that. They don't review anything within the public way, generally speaking. So that's about the size of it. And they are, what do you call it? They make recommendations to other bodies such as the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, but they also make recommendations to the Building Commissioner.
Okay. Don't they have to have a certain makeup?
Yes, they have to have someone from the Historical Commission. They have someone from the Planning Board. They're supposed to have a representative of the downtown businesses. They usually have someone with design capability, like an architect, a landscape architect, an artist, or someone like that. And Nate was a staff person for them for a long time. Is there anything else that I'm missing? Yep.
Okay.
It's fun. It's really fun. Yeah.
How often do they meet?
They meet, currently they're meeting once a month.
Okay. So Karen, you're interested in doing that? Are you interested, Bruce? No, I'm sick. Okay.
So
Jesse, were
Karen.
you?
Karen nominates self, Bruce seconds.
Okay. Any objections? Any alternative preferences?
Consensus.
Nope. Karen for DRB.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. CPAC,
CPAC.
Community Preservation Act.
Does everyone know what that is? Community Preservation Act Committee is a committee that takes money that comes to us through, it's a surtax on real estate transactions, isn't it? And a surtax on our real estate taxes, right? And it's around $1 million a year, and they allocate it to various projects, but they have to be either historical preservation, affordable housing, recreation, or open space, right? And there are different minimums that they have to allot to each one. And what they do is evaluate a lot of applications, and then they make a recommendation to town council, who has to make the final vote. And that's also a really interesting group and an interesting, thing that they're doing. And they only have to really get very busy at certain times of the year. So they're not busy
It's
all
mostly in the
year long.
fall. As
I think it's
understand.
mostly in the fall.
They get applications kind of around now. They deliberate maybe twice a month through the fall, and then they have their recommendations to council, and they send them off to council to be approved, and so, yeah. So is anybody?
Right, the CPA committee during the fall, so say it's proposals are due this year, September 30th, and then they'll start meeting. They review them, they hold public hearings to have presentations, and so say October, November, December, they might be meeting twice a month in the evenings. You say it's like every other Thursday or something, they'll set a schedule. And then, as Doug said, they make recommendations to town council. They try to coincide with the budget cycle. So they try to recommend their funding. And then they might have, subsequent meetings in the spring, but not as frequent. So it really is busy, say 4 months out of the year, 5 months out of the year, in fall to early winter.
So, all right. And do we have anybody else that's interested in that? We need to nominate someone, right? Yeah, I mean, yeah,
We do need a member from the planning board, right?
right.
Yep. But we could
I guess we could
ask
nominate
Janet
Janet.
when she comes back. Maybe you could wait till your next meeting
Do we,
for that one.
could we wait until September 20th to
I
make
think
it
so,
official,
yeah.
or to see if Janet's,
I think you could wait, yeah.
we could wait for
Mhm.
that one,
Especially since Solar Bylaw Working Group will be ending.
tapering off?
Yep.
Looks like the timeline, the application process opens Friday, September 1st, closes September 30th, and then the applicant presentations begin November 9th. So, maybe later.
Maybe it's shifted. Yeah,
We'd be part of that. The planning board member would be part of reviewing.
Yeah.
what the pre-
yeah, they,
Yeah, so after the proposals are received on September 30th, the CPA committee will likely meet once or twice to generate questions for applicants to have them be part of their presentation. So the CPA committee would have some initial review on their own, and then they schedule these presentations by the applicants after they've already met. So they will be meeting in October, November, December, January, and probably wind down in February. So that's been the cycle the last few years.
yeah, the proposals. Uh-huh, okay. All right. Yes, Dave.
Just want to make a quick plug for CPAC. It's a great committee. It's a great process. I've been involved with it for almost 20 years. These are the funds that help pay for a spray park at Croft Park, the North Common project here, historic preservation of buildings, barns, new recreation facilities, open space, trails, trails that, from Puffer's Pond to the Mount Holyoke Range. So really fun, and a lot of nonprofits, of course, apply as well. So affordable housing projects, we've used these funds to fund a number of affordable housing projects from Olympia Oaks to some of the new projects that are on the tarmac right now. So it's a great committee, a lot of fun. Concentrated work, though. I think they make their recommendation by February 1st or February 15th, and then it really tapers down.
Okay. So you can't do fall. Yep. And I guess we better wait. We're gonna have to draw straws here at the next meeting. All right, what's the next one? Solar bylaw? So I'm gonna nominate Janet. All right. And that was everything, right? They're kind of moribund at the moment, right? Are they? I mean, yeah. for solar bylaw. Yeah. All right, so that leaves CPAC to be determined, and we'll see if we can twist Janet's arm. Okay. All right, I guess that's it. All right, so the time is 8:09. Does anybody else have anything they want to say for this evening? Thank you all for coming in person, and we will see you on Zoom on September 20th, right? That's the next meeting. Good night.